On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, marking the start of the Nazi regime and immediately beginning the systematic persecution of Jews, including marking Jewish-owned businesses with the Star of David and anti-Semitic phrases, revoking citizenship with the enactment of Nuremberg race laws by the Reichstag, and destroying Jewish homes, synagogues, and businesses during what became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, in November of 1938. People in the U.S. were aware of the Nazi treatment of Jews in Germany, but most Americans were unwilling or reluctant to allow Jewish refugees into the country. As a result, immigration waiting lists were created that predicted that it would take years for everyone to escape into the U.S. But due to the actions of some individuals who broke through the United States' complex procedural barriers and anti-immigration attitudes of the late 1930s, some Jewish families, like Charlotte Wohlheim's, were lucky enough to get a sponsor and live to tell their story. Dr. Daniel Green, a curator at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, has said that it's not like the story was buried when talking about American awareness of the Holocaust. According to him and records of newspapers at the time, Americans were informed of the Holocaust through the media, but often weren't willing to process and understand the information in an effort to let Americans off the hook. A public opinion poll conducted a week after Kristallnacht in November of 1938 found that most Americans believed that the Nazi treatment of Jews in Germany was unjust, therefore disapproving of it. However, when asked if the Jews should be allowed to escape their exile and enter into the United States, the majority, 71%, did not want these refugees to immigrate. This reluctance to help those Jewish immigrants stemmed from many events happening in the U.S. First, the United States had just come out of the Great Depression and was now in a recession, and many Americans feared the burden that Jewish immigrants could place on the economy, and that it would be impossible for those immigrants to find jobs. During this time, there was also a general anti-immigration sentiment in the U.S. and a fear and distrust of anyone who was different or considered un-American. This sentiment was perpetuated by leaders who were spreading anti-Semitism, such as Father Charles Coughlin and Henry Ford. Finally, Americans were looking to their government for guidance during this time of war. The United States has had a long history of anti-immigration policies, starting with the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s and continuing with the current debate over Mexican immigration policies. The U.S. government didn't act much different during this time. In 1924, Congress passed a law to limit the number of immigrants that could come to the United States to around 164,000 per year, allotting only 25,957 visas to be issued to people born in Germany. When confronted with the possibility of expanding this number during the Evian Conference in July 1938, the U.S., along with most of the other countries, did not offer to let more refugees in. During this time, a young girl was growing up in a small town near Frankfurt called Aschaffenburg.
My name is Charlotte Wohlheim. My parents, my sister, and I arrived in New York Harbor on Christmas Day, 1938. We had lived in a small town near Frankfurt. The town was called, or is called, Aschaffenburg.
Charlotte's father was the treasurer of a local synagogue, and when he heard that German officials were coming to confiscate the money, he distributed the funds to the poorest people in the community. Officials arrested him and sent him to jail. After, Charlotte's family hoped to move to Spain, but after they sent their belongings, the Spanish Civil War broke out and the borders were closed. Even as a little girl, Charlotte was aware of the anti-Semitism that was present in her community.
I was never able to go to public school, and then we would hear the Hitler Youth marching along the street, singing derogatory songs pertaining to what they would do to Jews.
In order to be issued a visa from the U.S., German Jewish immigrants needed 5 copies of a visa application, 2 copies of a birth certificate, an assigned number on the waiting list, 2 sponsors, a certificate of good conduct from German police authorities which included multiple government records, and evidence of passing a physical exam. As time went on, the U.S. added more items to the long list that were needed for a visa. In order to emigrate out of Germany after 1937, Jews needed a passport, a certificate from the Reich Ministry of Finance approving emigration, including proof that all taxes were paid, as well as a customs declaration which permitted the export of household goods. Therefore, Jewish refugees who were trying to flee the horrors of the Holocaust often couldn't do so because it was so hard or impossible to obtain and afford the many documents required to leave Germany and get entrance to places like the U.S. Many Jewish refugees tried to establish family connections with people in the U.S. to try to gain a sponsorship. Archives find over 20 letters written to Henry Morgenthau Jr., the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury alone. Many were met with the same response saying, "You can readily see how impossible it would be to gain a sponsorship from him." As a result, even those who had connections were often not guaranteed a sponsor. The process wasn't any easier for Charlotte's family.
The only way you could come into this country is if someone in this country was able to prove that he or she had funds to support the family. So at no time would the family apply for welfare. My mother had a cousin who, as a young man, wanted to come to America to seek his fortune, and my grandfather gave him the means to do that. And he now was in a position to be able to sponsor us.
Some journalists, like Dorothy Thompson, were risking their lives to keep Americans informed of the persecution of Jewish people, urging them to take action, saying, "It is a fantastic commentary on the inhumanity of our times that for thousands and thousands of people, a piece of paper with a stamp on it is the difference between life and death." Later, Thompson became the first American journalist to be expelled from Germany by the Nazi regime, but back in America, continued to encourage Americans to break through the anti-immigration stigma. November 9th, 1938, the night before Charlotte's family's planned departure, more infamously marked the date of Kristallnacht.
We were all asleep when the front door was smashed open, and men came in and proceeded to go into the kitchen and pull out all the glassware, all the dishes, and smash them. Of course, we all woke up, and my parents had no idea what was happening. My mother told my sister and me to get dressed and climb out the window and hide in the garden. And my father went to the local precinct because he thought this was a singular act of vandalism. This saved the police having to round him up. They just kept him there. Fortunately, we had papers to prove that we were leaving the country, and that saved him from being deported to a concentration camp.
After the terrifying night of Kristallnacht, Charlotte and her family began their journey to America by traveling to Le Havre, a port city in northwestern France. From there, they boarded a boat headed for New York City.
The journey to America, the only one who wasn't seasick was my father. And I remember saying to my mother, "I don't want to go to America, I want to die." Because being seasick day and night is horrendous. But we made it, and we landed in New York Harbor on Christmas Day, 1938.
Charlotte stayed involved with sharing the stories and lessons of the Holocaust throughout her career. Working with American teachers' seminars on the Holocaust and Jewish resistance, she helped teach educators by sending them on trips to important sites like concentration camps. Today, Charlotte shares her family story and legacy by working with the Holocaust Center for Humanities Speakers Bureau. The action that Charlotte's relative took showed the true positive impact that can come from just one person breaking away from a more collective sense of neglect and disregard. In addition to those he sponsored, there was also other U.S. groups working at the time to help refugees out of danger. In 1940, Eleanor Roosevelt founded the United States Committee for the Care of European Children, which was committed to helping refugee children across Europe find a safe place to escape. In 2 years, they were able to rescue some 300 children. In Cincinnati, a $100,000 grant was given to the Jewish National Fund by Alfred M. Cohen for purchase of land in Palestine for the establishment of a farm colony. This farm colony of 1,000 acres would be available for Jewish refugees to settle. For a country that was built on the ideals of liberty and opportunity, the U.S. government and general American public should have taken more definitive action to assist those who are being persecuted and forced from their homes by the Nazi regime. Since the end of World War II, there have been 7 other genocides, and there are many ongoing refugee crises today. The U.S. government and people should take their lack of action in the 1930s as a lesson to be more open-minded and welcoming to those in need, and work to truly uphold liberty and justice for all.
Find out what's going on in the world. See where, I don't think anyone expects you to collect an army and march, but there are things that can be done by each of us to kind of bring knowledge and a little bit more fair play in whatever capacity presents itself to us. And if it doesn't present itself, find one.